Lovely, thank you very much. Please carry on, yes. Shopping free. Okay, wait. Thank you very much, and I'd like to welcome to the second part of the day and introduce you to the first speaker, Ren Sneddon from the University of East London. And I'll hand over to talk about dual books.
Okay, thank you very much. You're quite talking dance and we'll forward you snack on the way home. Right, just to introduce myself briefly, I'm a dual language, I'm a French-English bilingual from my early stage. Before I became a teacher, I was a community activist and I was a parent. So when I became a teacher in Stoke Newington in the late 70s, to me it was very self-evident that as a teacher you worked with the community immediately around your school and very closely with your parents. And I did become an EAL specialist. I went on to be a teacher educator at the University of East London, and then I became a researcher. And now I'm an Indian grandmother, and I'm still supervising one PhD student. But all along, I think language education, valuing children's languages, I'm still very much a language activist. What Peter was saying resonates with me. I think we have a huge language deficit, and there's this huge frustration. It's not addressed at policy level, but I could talk for hours and hours and hours. So I think teachers have been making dual language books for years, and we used to make them by buying lots of copies of the same book and sticking labels in them, getting parents and anyone who spoke the language in the classroom, and they may not have been the most brilliant translations. But we had so many ways of working with children to get their languages acknowledged in the classroom. I think what Jane was talking about earlier. And then there was a wonderful project from Gregory, for example, where a lot of dual language books came out of small publishers working primarily from drama projects, for example, and then writing books, so developing stories with children as major all-school projects, and then turning them into books. Nowadays, it's mostly mantra books, which you may well be familiar with. But what has always been noticeable to me is just how much children value finding books in the school library, in the classroom, in the languages that we speak. And just what a big discovery that is. And the status it gives to children's languages to have sections in the library with books in their own languages. Making dual language books was a very valuable way of working, getting to know families who might say, mothers bringing their children to school might just say, oh, I don't speak English, and pass you by if you try to engage them. But if you manage to say, we've got some photos of the children and we're making a book and can you come and help, then all of a sudden they did realize they had enough English to talk to me and come into my classroom and work with the child. And that was something I did a lot as a new teacher. And then in the mid-80s, I had the support of a teacher, which I think is crucial. Peter mentioned it, Jane mentioned it, you know, having your management there. Developed a bilingual mother and child writing group actually in the classroom as a weekly, as a Wednesday afternoon workshop. And we ended up publishing internally our books in 20 languages. And mothers and children worked out what they wanted the book to be about. And there were all kinds of personal events and things. But we were also at the time piloting the IMEA's own word processing system in Turkish, Gujarati, Urdu. So the parents could use these languages. Children knew how to use computers. So it was very fruitful. So that in a sense is my background. And there's an awful lot you can do about working with dual language books in the classroom, even if you don't know the languages. I'm just going to outline one or two issues here, projects. When I went to become a teacher educator at UBL, I did have a brief to make sure that EAL worked all the way through the teaching program. So it wasn't just something you did in English, it had to go into maths, it had to go into science, it had to go into the arts program. And I had an MA in EAL, and my MA students wanted to develop action research projects. So we had an action research group that just worked for 2 years, trying out all different kinds of dual language books in the classroom. And Mantra was a part of the project in that they gave us all the books free. And from there we developed a connection at the university. And the website, which is still there, it is out of date because I've been talking to Stuart about that. We have problems with websites now. We're becoming very commercial. We're becoming corporate in the university, and my website's going to get taken over. And so at the moment, I don't have the possibility of changing it, but it is still there. It's got quite a lot of information. In 2007, the London Borough of Redbridge had a surplus of funding in its education department. That's extremely rare, and I don't think that ever happens now. But they used it to buy a large collection of dual language books and give them to all their primary schools in the languages that the primary schools requested. And they developed a research project with volunteer teachers trying out ideas, trying out especially how to involve parents and encourage parents to read in both languages at home with the children. And they produced a book, which is now, it cost £50 when they published it, and it's now totally available free online, outlining all the different strategies that teachers use and producing resources for using dual language books in the classroom. Now, I piggybacked on that for a research project and got involved. So I'm going to give you one example of a classroom in which the teacher used entirely, or almost entirely, dual language books in year 1 to teach reading in English. She had 9 languages spoken in the classroom, and all the books were available in all these languages. This enabled her to send books home, for children to read them at home, have them read to them with their parents, by their parents at home. But then, because the stories were available in English as well, she could discuss this with the children in the whole class, even though she was only bilingual, they only spoke Dravidian. So there isn't, if you use the books like that, it doesn't matter that you don't know all the languages, and you can engage the children in conversations about how they get on. Right. Mindful of time, I then carried out a study on children, working with children. So all children identified from the Redbridge project by teachers, children who have little opportunity to learn the language of the home, so they didn't go to classes anywhere. I was working with teachers to support bilingualism using dual language books. So children were aged 6 to 8, learning in Albanian, French, Gujarati, Turkish, and Urdu, with parents mainly, but also in one case with each other. And my research questions were really about what could the observation of children reveal to me about the transfer of concepts and skills. We all know Cummings' work, and we all know that the way he initially wrote about it was about children learning their mother tongue and then transferring those skills to learning English. I wanted to know what happened when children had acquired their literacy in English first and were then going back to learning the home language. And of course, how bi-directional is that system, and yes, it does work. What's the relationship between English and home language? How does that affect the ease and nature of transfer? And that was based on work by Bialystok. And does reading two languages simultaneously have an impact on children's understanding of how language works and on their comprehension of the text? And some of that came from my own PhD research, where I found that children who had read the same story in two languages seemed to have a deeper understanding of the messages behind the story. And what was the impact on development of learner and personal identities? So an ethnographic study, right, 4 to 6 observations, recordings, transcriptions, and field notes. And for me, I think one of the most important things was then going back with my transcripts and field notes to the children and talking them over with children, and when I had the opportunity with mothers, like when you were discussing this, why, you know, what did you mean, why did you? And that was, I think, very revealing. The key findings, what was exciting about the project, was finding children working at the cutting edge of their ability to decode and to try and understand the text in the language of the home, which mostly they knew a lot less well by then than they knew English. I had children who just did not want to return to their classroom because we want to finish this work. And just the level of discussion and of metalinguistic, really stretching their resources was quite remarkable. What was reported then by parents was children using the home language much more in the house and being particularly proud that they were then able to talk to grandparents, either on the telephone or when they went back on holiday to the family's country of origin. The children all transferred skills from reading in English to reading in the family language in varying degrees, so that the Urdu one needed quite a lot more work on actually learning the writing system, learning the phonics, learning little poems associated with the letters. And enormous interest and pride in being bilingual and being able to keep in touch with family. I'm just going to outline a particular part of the research, which focused on 2 Albanian girls. They were aged 6 when I first encountered them as part of that project, and then I had an opportunity to study them again when they were in year 5. And they started school in the nursery, speaking only Albanian, and their mothers reported that they actually learned English extremely quickly. In year 1, their teacher, who was Navneet Pada, provided small group support for reading with understanding and making sure, so it's a small group of 6 children working with an experienced classroom, making sure they understood what they were reading. The mother's strategies when they were reading them were interesting, and they were very similar. Teaching phonics with fridge magnets. Both of them used fridge magnets to teach the children the different sound values, the different phonics in Albanian and in English. When they were working from the dual language book, they were reading the Albanian, because people always tell you with dual language books, the children will just read them the language they can read most easily. But that wasn't what they were doing. They were reading the Albanian first, focusing on the decoding. So quite a lot of work there. Mothers correcting pronunciation, checking understanding, children asking questions. And if you think that the mother's English wasn't actually that good, there was a lot of negotiating and discussion of meaning between. Using also the English text and illustrations and knowledge of stories, because, for example, when they came across the word pervert in the story, which means ordeal, neither the child nor the mother knew what that meant, either in English or in, I've only got 5 minutes, right. So then thinking, well, this was about an ordeal, and the story was not again Red Riding Hood. So Magda was remembering that the original story of Red Riding Hood had a wolf and something nasty happened, and it was really building on that knowledge that she discovered what ordeal might mean. Coming up to the summer holiday at that point, and these two girls, having read their way through something like 20 dual language books and becoming proficient, having become proficient readers of fairly simple books, I stepped out of my role as a researcher and suggested they might want to learn to write. And I gave them, one was off to Kosovo, the other one was off to Albania on holiday, so I gave them some diaries. And I thought, get your mums to help you and keep a diary. So keep it brief. They came back with these diaries, and they were best friends, and when I came back to see them, they plonked them on the table, so I took a picture of this, just to show me they had kept. They'd obviously confirmed how they were going to keep their diaries. Then I thought, well, do you want to turn them into books? So throughout the autumn term, they worked on developing their stories with their mother's help into writing them and illustrating them. And those books went into the school library. They were produced in multiple copies. They were read in assembly, and the girls became very, very proud of being authors. They really did see themselves as authors, and a lot of children were congratulating them on their stories. Now, a lot of you probably will know Cummings' work, and Margaret Cummings in Earl 2011. Children becoming bilingual authors, making personal books, has a very important impact, really, on how they see themselves in terms of literacy. One of the very important, vocabulary has been mentioned quite a bit this morning. And what one of the mother, I think it was Albana's mother, said, she's learned words in Albanian that I don't know. Well, yes, like pervert. And because through reading these books, they were moving away from what was only a domestic language. And they were getting a much wider, they were getting the whole vocabulary of story in both languages. So it's about children exploring who they are and what matters in their lives. And significant personal events like the holiday book. But then they moved on. And sometime later, some years later, they happened to be in Matthew Putnam's class again in year 5, and she called me and she said, you might want to come and watch this because they want to write a fiction book together. And I hadn't time to explain the whole context, but they're getting a bit jealous that other writing books were developing in school. They wanted to keep the edge, they weren't made writing. So what they did was, I had this great privilege of sitting in and watching the whole composition process. These two girls composing a story in English, and if you look at that, that's actually a first draft. You would be hard to find a spelling mistake there. They would debate for a long time, then one of them would write, then section by section, they would work from their own resources without dictionaries or internet to work out how to translate this. And this is a point where I realize I've actually brought the wrong presentations because I've got slides missing, but I haven't got time anyway. But I will tell tell you how there's fascination for me of the strategies used. Two girls with very similar levels of ability, pretty similar levels of knowledge of Albanian and English, working from their own resources, working at word level, arguing for 20 minutes about the meaning of endeco. And afterwards, when I took this transcript, I said, oh, why were you arguing so much about endeco? We weren't arguing this, we were having a discussion. But then, well, it means meanwhile, and we wanted to say while. So we were getting, and then at clause level, finding that sometimes a clause just snaps into place. You know, you say it in English, oh, it just comes to you. And then at other times, again, batting back and forward, trying to get. But then the whole thing about they hadn't learned any grammar. So a big discussion about a word. Haven't got it. Seriosish or seriosish. And they weren't sure why they knew two versions. And they were arguing, well, maybe it was a dialect, maybe your mum says it differently from my mum, maybe it's different in Kosovo. Actually, I found out afterwards, one's an adverb, one's an adjective. And then there was the other issue of case. You get case in Albania. And of course you don't in English, they haven't come across that. So they called it tenses, which was totally logical because that's where it's in verbs that you find these different endings meaning different things. And they were just kind of making up this grammar. And then aware that because they're dual language books, if you change something in the Albanian version, you've got to go back and change it in the English. So there was a lot of understanding. When they found, they want to say that on the left side, something happened on the left side of the computer in their story, and they realized they didn't know how to say that. So they just put on the side of the computer. Then they went back and changed the English version to make sure that they would match. And so anyway, so there was all this negotiating of meaning. Actually, I did have that one. And basically, here is the book that they produced. Oops. Oh, what do I have to do? Right click here.
There you go.
That's on my dual language book website. I mean, it obviously gives them real names. But I'm short of time, so I'm going to just go through the time. You can go and find it. They'd actually put a price in it, no, it's not necessary. But now, how do I get out of this?
Just minimize it. Yeah, minimize it at the top.
Thank you. And then I move on. So I think this is this was on Ghana afterwards talking about it. You know, I feel happy now because everybody in my schools knows I'm Albanian, and all my teachers. And they used to help, they used to be proud, they used to tell other teachers how good we were in Albanian. I always feel proud I've been good in my language and I've made a book. And I think what worked for them as developing bilinguals was support for learning English at nursery. Learning phonics, that translated very well. They knew their phonics in English, they understood the principles, and they could translate that into working out the phonics in Albanian. With a strong focus on comprehension. And I could tell from the strategies they were using that I think they had been taught to read very well, because they just had so many strategies when it was stuck for understanding. And from being in needing support at the beginning of year one for comprehension, by the end of year one, they were in the top reading group in the class. So very rich data story, working closely with parents, and also the school had language clubs at lunchtime. So they invited in either specialists or people from complementary schools, and children who spoke the language could take their friends and go along, learn a bit of language, do some activities. And then they linked to complementary schools. So Magda and Albana were recommended to go and attend the Sunday Albanian school. So that's, I just talked about, you know, the impact that had just on those two girls. I mean, I did write a book about the original called Bilingual Books by Literate Children, and the paper that goes into more detail about the whole writing process, which is fascinating. But the for all the children, the meta-linguistic understanding was a real revelation to me. And well, that's it, basically.
Thank you very much.
Questions, please?
I'm sorry, we rattled through that one.
One thing to mention perhaps is that Mandatory Books is now doing a lot more of your language books because they're using digital
Yes,
language on
yes.
board. So you can virtually get a book about everything and anything in any language.
Yes.
So it's much more flexible.
It's very, one of the difficulties has been, I mean, I got quite closely involved with Mantra Winishti Chatterjee was the director. And the problem is that the huge cost of publishing dual language books, which is why they choose a kind of generic story with their own in-house writers and artists, so there's no copyright issues. And then they publish that same story in 40, 50 languages. It does mean, from the point of view with working culturally with children, for example, working with Magda and Albana, there wasn't a single of those stories that had an Albanian setting. So if you're looking to work on culture as well as language, it's not ideal. But on the other hand, it's probably the only way of making the model commercial, and going digital, I think, is the next step now, because that can make a difference. You can get it's so much cheaper. So,
I think the Mantra books.
Mantra.
Mantra Lingua.
Mantra Lingua.
Mantra Lingua. If you Google them, you'll find the catalogue.
Yeah, you know, I'm now preschools, military for even before it goes, because I think all this needs to start even then, preschool.
Oh, yes.
Yes. All about learning English. I mean, it's all about child-centered learning now. I'm just thinking that, you know, storytelling, you can't force the children to sit and listen to story. I'm thinking about these Asian boys who are in the class who never come to sit down and listen to stories because of the English philosophy of child-centered learning, not making them do anything. You have to follow the child's interest. And they never come.
They don't come to
to the story, so they're really missing out on it. But, you know, you've given me lots of ideas about, you know, how parents coming in should be really necessary for them to listen to the parents coming into the nursery.
Yes.
To read the story to them.
Absolutely, and I mean, I was talking to Jane at lunchtime, very interesting what Jane was saying this morning, because I used to have parents coming in telling stories, and children who were not speakers of that language wanting to join in and really enjoying it, and quite often picking up phrases, picking up bits, and at one point my entire class knew how to say, and he was still hungry. In Gujarati. I mean, I knew myself, and I've forgotten that. But so, you know, working with parents. But the whole thing was, I mean, I'm also very involved in complementary schooling. And I mean, I haven't talked about that today. But it all works together in a sense, the idea of the complementary school, the home, and I was talking about faith settings as well, and the school. And what I did find as a teacher, if I noted, because I was teaching in the same school for quite a long time, if I did find that I thought one particular ethnic or language group was underperforming, I would approach a community organisation and ask them to help me convene a parents' meeting. and we would look at strategies on the principle that the school was failing to meet the needs of these particular children, and we needed to find out more about how we could do that. And I set myself up there beautifully because in the late 80s, a group of Bengali women said, among a number of issues at the school, they wanted Bengali classes for their children. And the school told me that we couldn't fund that. So I talked to the Sir John Cass Foundation and said, why don't you get the money together, organise a group, we'll send somebody down. And they did, and we funded it. And well, 25 years old, I'm still running, and I'm still fundraising. And I'm having trouble at the moment trying to raise the money. But it's this, for me, this worked across community and school.
Thank you very much indeed.
Right, well, I'm going to set up my USB things working by two handhelds. So if you have one this way and one this way. This one's a different one, you just need one copy, it doesn't matter then. If not, well,
Down bottom, yeah.
I need actually two because I have got, unless you forgot this.
The clicker's already there, it's already there. That one works. Yeah.
Good. Well, I'd like to welcome Oksana. That'd be nice, from Sheffield University. And I'll leave you
Thank you.
the floor. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to be here and it's lovely to be able to talk to you today about the use of several languages in the classroom and how we do it or we don't do it, and why it's a problem and how we can do it better. I'm doing research. I work as a lecturer at the University of Sheffield, and I do research with AEL learners in Sheffield schools, in Sheffield primary schools, and some of the data I'm showing to you today will be coming from the project I've done over the 2 years between 2013 and 2015 in Sheffield with these children. Okay, so this is just some data. You all know it very well. About the numbers of EL children in this country from the latest census. And as you see, there are lots of children and 350 languages are spoken. So we need to address it. We can't just close our eyes and say, oh, well, it's not happening. Even if you have 1 or 2 children with EL in your class, you still can't just ignore it. Okay? So I was thinking about the ways of kind of talking about translanguaging in the classroom and how it all works. And I thought, well, I thought that it builds up very nicely on Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, which you all are very familiar with, I'm sure. So you've got the middle, the smallest circle in the middle, what the child can do unassisted. You've got the central circle, that's how far you can stretch the child with support, and you've got the outer circle, what child cannot achieve, even if you have supported them to your best. Okay, so this is the model applied to generally in education. Okay, so here I tried to apply it to EEL children and show how this model is different for your EEL children in class with English native speaking children. Where do you click to make the red light go? Middle one? Oh yeah, okay. So we have got EEL children and native English speaking children in the middle with the knowledge that they already have. Okay? Yes, it can vary. If you have an EEL child who comes from the country and they've never been into education, yes, their starting point won't be the same as an English native speaking child. But let's say you have got 2 children, year 5, English native speaking child, knowing specific scientific concepts, and you have got an EEL child who came from another country, but they have this knowledge in their first language, yeah? So that's a first step. So that's where they are without you helping them. Then you as a teacher, you are introducing a new concept in the class. So all this white circle here, okay, that is zone of proximal development of the English native speaking child. So when you use your wonderful teaching techniques and methods to teach English native speaking children, they will understand it as far as the blue circle goes. Yeah. However, only this much probably, okay, it's not like representative in the percentages or anything, it's just the idea that I'm trying to get across, okay? So it's not exactly this much of these circles that they're going to be benefiting. But if you do your great teaching techniques and strategies, and you have EL children in class, they will probably understand only a fraction of what English native speaking children can understand, because they just don't understand the language. Okay, and then because you're a great teacher, you think, right, okay, I'm going to help them a little bit more. So then you say, I'm going to paraphrase things, I'm going to use synonyms, I'm going to provide them some extra visuals, I'm going to group them in such a way so that they can hear good models of English, I will give them some sentence starters in English. So all this is fabulous and adds a little bit more to their understanding, but you're not using their first languages yet, okay? You're only using, everything is done through the medium of English. I appreciate that teachers don't speak other languages, and this is a fair point, and I'll talk about it. Then we have the next circle, when the teachers, really brave teachers I call them, they go even further, and they introduce the first language in the classroom, but it is pretty much teacher-centered, so the teacher will translate the core concepts for the learners so that they can understand a bit better. So at the beginning of the lesson, even before the lesson, they will kind of develop a glossary of key terms translated in the first language. They will group learners with other learners in the class who speak the same language with the purpose of helping the first language speaking children help EL child translate just the core terms. They're not doing discussion in the first language, just kind of translation, yeah? Okay, and then we've got talking about the really last layer, which is quite a lot neglected right now in the classrooms in this country, based on my research and based on what I've heard at the conferences over and over again. When you let children use their resources to full, okay? You let them use their first language or first languages as they want and as freely as they want. And you don't need to worry, I don't understand it, as exactly has already been mentioned during these previous sessions today, okay? So they think into languages. They just do it all the time. They don't need your permission. But we are restricting them, doing this in the classroom right now, we're restricting and say we're not promoting it, okay? They may still be doing it. So I thought that this model kind of shows all these layers, how you can see how we can support them. So then talking about translanguaging, I will go very briefly through this. So translanguagism is kind of a very sexy term, okay, that we're using these days, representing this opportunity for the learners to use whatever linguistic resources that are available to them in the classroom to support their learning, their understanding, and Garcia actually talks about it beyond educational context, but I'm narrowing down for the educational context only here. And also, there are a few more definitions on your handout as well, just for your reference if you want. And also there are concepts of code switching and code mixing, and code switching is included in translanguaging. Okay, but the difference between the two is that when you code switch, let's say I code switch all the time at home, I'm bilingual or trilingual if you want, okay? So I would say half my sentence in English, a few words in Russian, the rest in English. Now speaking for me in English is somehow easier than in Russian, because I don't get enough practice in Russian. But if you really tell me, oh, Oksana, okay, hold on a second, I want you to say this sentence completely in Russian, I will pause, I will think, but I will say it. Okay, so that is code mixing. I know both versions, but I just choose for the simplicity or for the convenience to use it interchangeably. It's easier for my daughter, for example, to include English terms from school when she talks about her school experiences or about subject. Code mixing, on the other hand, that's what my niece does. She's 2 years old now. She doesn't know Russian. She doesn't know how to differentiate Russian and English. She just constructs her sentences with the words she remembers. So half of it will be in English, one word will be in Russian, but she won't understand or realize that some of it is in English and some of it is in Russian. It's not there, okay? So in school, at school level, I think it's pretty much code switching rather than code mixing. However, if you've got a child who has never heard of the specific term, year 6, let's say, give me a scientific term that is difficult, transmitter, okay, for example. I don't know what's transmitter in Russian, I have to think, okay, but I am aware what's transmitter. I know that it's different term in Russian than is in English, but code mixing is when you say transmitter is a transmitter. It's transmitter anyway, okay? So now then, I have kind of summarized the things that you need to be doing in order to ensure that you do translanguaging practices in the classroom. So you need to have an activity that supports the development or at least maintenance of learners' first language and stretches the development of their target language. Okay, so it's not like one or another; it's both together in translanguaging. Learners must engage with both languages, and learners are all meaning is always constructed by learners and not by the teachers for learners. Okay, so this is what Garcia really says, but I'm not entirely agreeing with her here, because if you look at these examples, or rather let's look at these examples here, because you have got them on your handouts. We have got here some examples of translanguaging and some examples of not translanguaging. If I give you just 1 minute quickly for yourself to read through them and decide whether it's translanguaging practice or not, just to keep you awake. Yeah? Okay, just intuitively think, okay, this one is not, this one is, this one is not, okay? Okay, decided? Which one do you think is not translanguaging? Okay. Okay, this is, okay, let's say 1, 2, 3.
2, not.
This one? Okay, 1, 2, 3, yeah? Okay, 2 is not. This is what everybody else thought. More or less? Yeah? Minus 3, okay. So Garcia says that the second one is not translanguaging, okay? So I'm glad you could see how the first two identify with it. Well, I've got a little asterisk there because I think it can be a translanguaging. Because when there is, okay, it just depends on how you look at it. Here, the teacher has done all the job of translating, yeah? And if you consider, if there are 2 versions and children just ignore the other one, yeah, it's not translanguaging, because they just read in their first language, it's easier, yeah? However, if you have got a child who's very motivated and who really wants to understand, just like you have in bilingual books, they will go back and will try to make sense of it. And it will be translanguaging, because they'll try to connect and see how things work. And they are progressing and developing in their both languages. Okay, so I would interpret this with a little caution, depending on how you see it. But I would not exclude this practice altogether, because I think it's an extra opportunity to see good models of languages and for independent learning to promote learner autonomy as well. Okay, so now I want to talk to you about some strengths of translanguaging and some obstacles on the way of translanguaging happening in the classrooms. Well, the first kind of advantage of it is that it allows learners to engage with and comprehend content of the curriculum better, because they are using all their resources. Here's an example from Fonte of the child trying to do maths in her first language. Okay, so she counts in Punjabi in her head, and they were asked to count in 5s in English. Yeah, so she would do 25. Okay, 30, and so on. So she is doing it in 2 languages. If she was not allowed, it may well take her longer. But if they're chanting it at the whole class, 25, 30, 35, and so on, okay, she is taking part and she's able to do it. Okay, so I have got some quotes from the e-teacher interview data. We're not covering that, okay? But this is just reinforcing how teachers see using the first language helpful in the classroom. There is not too many kind of examples of this, really. Okay, so here is another. I like showing examples, you know, from the data. So here is a test data, not really a test. I gave it to the learners to for other reasons rather than testing them. Okay, but I told them you can use your first language if you want. And here we've got the girl whose first language is Hungarian, and she put here roots, yeah, Gurkha and Gurkari or whatever it is, for roots. So she was able to demonstrate her knowledge in her first language, but if she was not allowed to use first language, that would be a cross, that would be a gap, and she wouldn't have this knowledge there. And then she would get a 0 in her test, because you have to get 3 right, okay? And then you would think, oh, she doesn't know. But this shows you, yes, she does. So we're here differentiating between the conceptual knowledge and kind of the presence of conceptual knowledge there, and the linguistic resources getting in the way to demonstrate those, okay? So here is another example, another child doing it in Slovakian. So we've got water and blatter, very actually similar in sound to Russian. Voda is voda in Russian, and blatter is bolota, which is mud, okay? It's really interesting. The child gets it wrong, but the child had a go, yeah? We can see that the child is not talking about elephants and frogs. The child is talking about things that are relevant. So we at least can see that the child is understanding, oh, in blue, actually, the correct answers, okay? So the child is understanding the question, and they are talking about science, and they are talking about relevant things. And here, the child has got it right. Here, listi, which is leaves, okay? Here, there is no answer, and here is the same blatter. It's wonderful how the child has scribbled over this kind of roots to show that there is blatters there, yeah? So really trying to get the message across, really trying to show what they know, okay? Still haven't got the point, but showing the understanding. And if we're able, good teachers are able to see that and able to kind of capture and realize, yes, the learning is happening, yeah, rather than that there is no learning. And this is allowing learners, first language is allowing learners to demonstrate it. Okay, allows maintenance and development of the target and home language. Target is English, home is their first language. Here is again example from Conte. Children producing bilingual books, trilingual in this example, where the child couldn't speak any English, but produced a very nice script in Bangladesh, okay, demonstrating high literacy in the first language, and being able to take part, so identity gets across, recognition gets across, sense of achievement is there, motivation goes up, okay? And the last point here, it equalizes social and educational power of target and minority languages in the classroom, and therefore promotes cross-national equality, and that's what we want in our more and more multilingual classrooms. Now then, some problems. Why is it not really happening in these classrooms, or only happening to a very small extent? Well, first of all, learners are illiterate or poorly literate in their home languages. They cannot really get the points across using their first language. They can speak, but they cannot write. So they can't really, even if you tell them you can write in your test paper in your first language, if they can't, they can't. Full stop. Okay? So, but as I said, good teachers can still see the kind of examples of knowledge if it is there. Okay, so the second one is learners lack the knowledge of subject-specific vocabulary in their home languages, particularly in primary school. Okay, when kids come without this knowledge yet acquired in the school. So when they learn in year 5 and year 6 some scientific terms, I'm always talking about science because I've done it about science project and learning science in primary schools. So they just don't have the vocabulary to talk about it in first language. Okay, so then they say, then they find it confusing. They cannot really talk about it. They lack the vocabulary to talk about it. And teachers say, oh, it's a problem. It's easier for them to talk in English. But there are bilingual dictionaries. There are other ways of support. In secondary schools, for example, children are more likely to be able to talk about it. Okay, and the learners talking about it as well, not knowing. Now then, the third one, teachers lack the knowledge in learners' home languages. And therefore, they cannot really effectively assess the learner's work because they just cannot access the code in which it's written. And I thought, oh, it's not a problem, it's not a problem. You take a dictionary or you enter it in Google and you get a translation. Here we go, sample of learner's work. I did spend half an hour trying to decode at least one of these words, and Google resisted to show me what language it was and what it meant. So it can be a problem. Here is the work produced by learner, but I cannot make a judgment about how good it is or how accurate it is. Here is another one, neatly done, all over the place in Czech language. I did ask Google to translate this from Czech into English or into Russian, and Google said no translations found. Yeah, so you can be pretty stuck with it. Having said that, we should not say, oh, because we can't make sense of it, they're not allowed to use it. They are and they should be, and I will explain in a second why. Okay, schools do not embrace and promote translanguaging pedagogy. Okay, and therefore learners are reluctant to use it in the classroom. If you don't say how wonderful it is, they feel embarrassed of their first languages. Nobody uses it, we never do it. The learner says, do you use it? Do you use it in your classroom? No. Do you use it on the playground? Oh yeah. Okay, so we are just kind of stopping it. It comes from teachers saying it's wonderful, and then everybody pick up on it. Okay, so there were 450 test papers that I gave to learners, and only 3 of them had a go in writing it in their first language. Everybody else would struggle through the medium of English. Okay, so here was a nice example. I really like it, and I want you to look at this example. How much time do I have? 2.5 minutes? It was a joke, by the way. So, okay, but anyway, let's do it quickly. I hope you like it. I want you to look at this item, and I want you to think: if you had an EL child in your class, where would the child struggle with this? Would there be any problems with doing this item? And if there were any problems, where would they do? What do you think? Just start shouting out, because we don't have time to think. Okay, so there will be problems with vocabulary, like an environment. Yes, what else would be the problem?
Features.
Features, yes, yeah, vocabulary.
They might think it's feet.
Okay, yeah, okay. They might, yes.
There's a difference in what penguin is.
Penguin, yeah. African child never seen a penguin in their life.
You
Yes.
have to know how feature links to helping.
Very good, yes. How about this space where they need to write? Can this be a problem?
Yeah.
What kind of problem would that be?
So if they don't know, let's see, the context behind it, then they can't express it in whatever language.
Yeah, let's say they know context behind it. Let's say they know the penguins and they know the features. Let's say they just don't know how to say it in English.
Yeah.
They're going to have trouble, yeah? So let's have a look at some examples of learners' work. What I have done as part of this exercise, I also asked learners as they were going through the test items, I asked them to underline or circle any words they didn't understand, because I wanted to see where the problems were. So here we go, the learner's work, okay? So that's number 1. The words they don't understand, feature, penguin, and environment, obviously cannot answer the question. So we have language growth, and they didn't have access to bilingual dictionary. If there was a dictionary, maybe the chances are higher that the child will at least get the question, yeah? The second one is very honest, I don't know. So we assume that there is a problem with subject knowledge. So let's say they understood the question, they didn't know just the scientific knowledge to answer it. And the third one is my favorite. Make a judgment if it is a correct answer, if the learner demonstrates the knowledge of knowing what it is or not. If you were a teacher judging the performance of your learner.
Yes.
Is knowledge there?
Yes.
Knowledge is there, yeah? So, okay, so it's fluffy tummy, isn't it? That is kind of an issue of concern. But you say as a teacher, using your common sense, yes, I know what they're talking about. If you look at the SATs marking paper, there is no fluffy tummy anywhere on the scale, yeah, obviously. So they got 0. And zeros on their papers mean no knowledge, yeah? So by the end of it, the assessment is not accurate for these learners. It's not representing what they know. It rather shows mistakenly what they don't know, okay? So sample examples here, if you look, learners are using English language. They're using the wrong words. Look, strips or stripes, whatever, okay? This is one paper, this is another paper, but the same kind of problem here. Not really a problem, but the ways they, sorry, this circle should have been here. There, okay, so what we have here is they're using the wrong vocabulary. We just don't have time really here and here as well. But if you combine the 2 items together, you will see that the problem is just the wrong vocabulary, but the concept is there. They say roots and weeds, and exactly roots and weeds, okay, not roots and weeds, but these 2 parts of the plant are used to get the water to travel through the soil to the leaves, okay? So the scientific knowledge is here. The language is not used quite accurately or appropriately, but as a teacher, you can, if you can see that, then you can, then it's good for you because you can acknowledge it. The knowledge is there, okay? But because if they were allowed to write it in their first language, they were probably more likely to name the parts of the plant in the right way, okay? So now then, in a minute that I have left, what we have done as a result of all this, we have developed some materials to support EL learners in the classrooms with learning science, and there are other things that we're supporting them beyond using the first language. But one of the things is we allow the learners to use the first language and engage with their first language for the learning purposes. So we give them space to write and draw things and label things in their first language and write things, write definitions in their first language. And it doesn't matter that you don't understand it. What matters is it makes sense to child. Okay, so let's say there was a word abad, okay, in English. And I know that in Russian it's buton. So I'd quickly scribble buton over here, okay? And when the teacher keeps presenting things and talking and mentions bad, I would not be lost because I'd quickly look into my handout or my worksheet and say, oh, buton. And I'm straight back again with my teacher, listening. I haven't lost, I haven't missed out on anything that the teacher is talking about. So this additional kind of interaction with the first language allows learners to construct the meaning using the resources that they have without missing out on half of them just because we don't allow them to use it. These worksheets also provide them an opportunity to keep a systematic record of their own notes. Okay, it involves learner training and so on. But this is one. Another one is when it goes home and you can talk. They do it in a class, but also talking with parents at home and writing in the first language what they know about certain things. Drawing about it opens a lot of doors and opportunities for them to show what they know. Okay, so now the last two slides, 30 seconds, okay? So translanguaging in the context of this country, is it an oasis or is it a mirage? Okay, so there are lots of factors that influence success of translanguaging in the classroom. One of them is whether it happens in the primary classroom or secondary classroom and who initiates it. In the primary classroom, it's very likely that the teacher will be initiating it because learners just don't have enough linguistic resources to really talk about things by themselves yet. Okay, so I say, so this is extensive translanguaging kind of. I try to use this analogy with the number of signal on your phone, when you get the signal on your phone. So I kind of try to do it this way. And then secondary, the learners kind of, because here teachers will be doing a lot of translation, because learners may not know these facts or terms in English yet. So the teacher will have to provide translated terms for them. In secondary school, however, they have got the knowledge, they can translate, they can use the dictionaries. Also, we're looking at the proficiency in the home language. Okay, here is I just explained. So if proficiency is low, teacher will be doing a lot of translanguaging work for them. And if proficiency is higher, obviously the teacher will be eliciting translation rather than providing translation. And I say it's higher order translanguaging as opposed to lower order translanguaging, because if you're pushing child to translate, they're much more engaged with it rather than you provide a translation by yourself. It's all about kind of making your brain work. Okay, rather than always feeding, like spoon feeding. Okay, if you always spoon feed the second language, it's not the same as you are constructing meaning by yourself of the resources that are available to you. The next thing is the density of EL learners in the class. Well, if you only have one Russian speaker or one Chinese speaker, they cannot really translanguage much with another learners, or if you've got 3 children speaking all different languages, it can be a bit difficult, right? However, if you have got a lot of kids, yeah, you can group them and you can really facilitate the practices of sharing knowledge and experience in the first language. Also, as I have just exemplified in my previous slides, the ethos of the school and training and translanguaging can, actually directly influences the amount of it happening in the classroom. If teachers are not trained, they don't understand why and how it works, then of course they're not going to be using it. And of course their children are not going to be using it because they're not told how to, okay? Some kids may still do it internally, in secondary schools particularly, because they have, because they just naturally do it. I naturally do it. I naturally translanguage, okay? So, and then if we're looking at the assessment, so there are 3 kind of models. In using English language only, that's what we do in this country pretty much, yeah? Okay, so mainstream teacher can quickly mark and assess it, not a problem. The problem is that they can't demonstrate their knowledge, but for us as teachers, that's not a problem, because they know English language, okay? But either target language or home language is used, so learners are given 2 papers. You can do it either in English or in Russian. It's not 2, yeah? Either this version or this version, not the combination. Okay, and this practice actually exists in America. Okay, here you have got kind of more difficulty because you've got mainstream teacher. If the paper is done in English, mainstream teacher can assess it. If it's done in a home language, then you need help of bilingual assistant or interpreter. That involves money, yeah, time and resources. If the schools are ready to pay for it, then then it's wonderful practice, okay, good enough practice, okay, because they're still choosing between two languages. However, the third model, when both languages are used, and they can trans-language in the paper, but the problem is exactly the same, the time and resources, so it's not any worse as this one, it maybe is better, because it allows learners to do all the combination. The only problem is time and resources, and government is not particularly willing to provide these resources for EL. So that's where we are right now, and that's where I stop for today, but just for today for this talk, and I carry on doing this research. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Let's take one question before we break, for another coffee break.
So it's taking me the long.
No, that's fine. Anybody would like to raise a question?
Yes, with the speed of this.
Yeah, I wonder if you could just, I know you sort of touched on this, but talk about the difference between translanguaging to learn versus translanguaging to show your knowledge. Because it strikes me that all of the examples you actually gave us are translanguaging for children to demonstrate what they know, or to maybe consolidate what they've learned with their classmates. But how do you think translanguaging actually drives learning in the classroom?
Right, okay, so this material that I have developed, that's the way of concept, that's the next step in the project kind of done. I've got some examples of learners doing it, okay, but not really a lot of them doing translanguaging right now, they all do it in English pretty much, okay, so, but I know that it's difficult to put it in words, but I know that as a bilingual learner myself, I know that kind of the way that you understand and conceptualize what you are being told, when there are gaps, when you don't understand, you bring in all your experiences from the previous life, from previous schooling, from previous experiences with your parents and things, and these experiences, if they were in your first language country, then they would be in your first language. So things are in your head firmly in that language, but these phrases, these expressions, okay, let's say doing an experiment, yeah, or recording an experiment. If I know all these wonderful words, academic language in Russian, I'd automatically be wanting to do it in Russian, yeah? In English, I'd be translating. But if I knew it in English, I would be immediately putting it in English. So translanguaging really happens in learners' heads. It's not really as visible as kind of maybe you want me to demonstrate. It's there in their heads.
Give your example of the root system of a plant.
Yeah.
Whether a child has had, what if a child has never encountered anything about the root system of plants in their home language?
That's right.
Which is entirely possible.
Absolutely.
And they come into a classroom.
True.
And how is translanguaging going to help them understand that there are different components to a plant? I'm not talking about the labels of things,
sure.
But they've never encountered this idea before. Or let's even take it further, photosynthesis, which is undoubtedly something they've never really talked about with their moms and dads, unless they're scientists, probably. You know, how does translanguaging help them access new concepts they've never previously encountered in their own language?
Yes, very valid point. Coming back, to the one of my last slides, saying that it all depends, the extent and success of translanguaging depends on the learner's proficiency in their first language. If they don't know the things to draw on, well, of course they cannot use it. Of course they don't have any other choice but to try and grasp it in English. And that's what primary school children pretty much have to do, because they still have not developed this conceptual understanding.
So it's no different from any other child.
No, but you have large numbers of kids who can benefit from it, who have got the knowledge, but we just don't let them use it. But you can develop kind of translanguaging a bit by asking parents to help them at home with it, okay? Or asking, or giving them bilingual dictionaries, as and how teachers find it appropriate and useful. I'm not saying, oh, all learners have to know translanguage. I'm saying those who find it helpful should be allowed to. That's kind of my approach.
Yeah, obviously from personal experience, my nieces are brought up in Geneva, so they went out there, the elder ones started school within months of them going out there. So I think it's almost, they do translating languaging, you go the opposite way. She's actually got to a point where she went to French school, learned all this information in French,
she then, for personal reasons, she went to an English-speaking school in her teens, and her dad then had to start teaching her maths in English. Because she knew it in French, she didn't know the words in English.
Yeah, or they just going to translate.
And in a way, that's exactly what's happening to me or my daughter now. It's kind of, it reverses it. It kind of goes, and like happening from the top up to that, and then you're trying to find words in Russian instead of trying to find the words in English. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, that's. Shall we
I think what's interesting is use of a vague language. You don't know a word, like you don't know the word roots, but you might want to use something vague.
Something else very close.
So like that thing that you have, it's that thing you have at the bottom of the and that you might want to do in your first language. So actually, that's the kind of thinking aloud in your first language. And then the word at the end of it, the vocabulary item is
no, it's all very complex.
the English one. So that would be really interesting to track the vague language.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know the word.
I think there's 101 such ideas there.
Yeah, so that would
Still there, copies the last one, yeah.
This is more a comment. In one of the things that's being done in the trilingual schools in Kazakhstan is to encourage translanguaging at the upper secondary level. And that's primarily because if I may be a Kazakh speaker, but I'm studying, let's say, biology through the medium of English, it's to ensure that some of the sources I use are in Kazakh. So I'm also being exposed to that academic language in Kazakh. And that translanguaging, judicious use of translanguaging, is to ensure that the academic language is developing, or students are developing knowledge of academic language and actually free language.
Yeah. If you ask me to do the session in Russian, I fail dramatically. I cannot put two words together. When Russian native speakers ask me to tell them about what they do in university, I start speaking in English. I just cannot. I don't have the language to talk about it nicely. We'll be separated in bits and pieces, unfortunately.
But you would find it quite quickly as a native speaker of Russian, if you put in some effort, you read a few
Yes, of
papers
course.
on
I
it.
would get the resources, but it doesn't come as naturally.
Yes,
I
but
keep
you'd
doing
be
it.
able to do it.
Yeah.
If you translanguaged a little more, you would be able to do it.
Yes, thank you.
Good, thank you very much, Oksana. We have another set of coffee, we have a quick break, we'll reconvene at 20 past. Thank you very much. Coffee and also there's also
Sorry, I forgot to say that on the handout with the link to the website where these materials are available free.
Hello. Yes, just let me just pop this in there. And I'll
Yeah, sure.
allow for that to this now. I forget. Try this. Yes. Continue. Right.
Yes.
So
Yes, but they don't like it. About how far you can stretch it. They don't speak English. They cannot anyway, that's Russia. Here's my question.
So
Oh, thank you so
All right, we'll put that.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
I'll see you again.
Yes, I will. We'll take it out.
It's shocking, because they can't speak English well enough to be speaking English. No, that's serious. This linguistic thing is sad. If my parents had spoken to me in English, well, it would have been stayed good for me. You know, I haven't looked at it in a long time. It's been 7 years ago. I was in UK conference. And just moved there and didn't have this. And
and it was
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll come back and we'll have a final phase here, which is 2 more talks. One by Wallace and one by Charlotte. And then we'll have a talk together with Hamish at the end. And the goal is to finish by 4:45. Yes. The goal is to finish by 4:45. We'll wrap up by 5 o'clock at the latest. So come what may, that will happen. So if I'd like to introduce Professor Catherine Wallace. Wallace, a long time ago, we were discussing. And very welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I feel I want to apologise straight away because I think we're talking about English. But English is part of being bilingual, so I don't have too many excuses for that. So, as you see, the broad topic of my talk is literacy and the bilingual learner. I'm going to be looking at EAL leaders in development schools, and I'm going to be talking about 2 studies I did over some years. I did some research on EAL readers in a primary school in West London, and then in a secondary school in the same part of, well, a bit further west, shall we say. So the first school I called Holly Tree School, and this is a recent image of the school. And I researched this setting in over 10 years, actually, because the first study I did, and as you see, it was investigating the experience of reading of 9-year-olds in year 5, was in the year 2000, and it coincided with the start, if you remember that far back, of the National Literacy Strategy. Remember that? And I wanted to see how the children were responding to this new event in school life. It ended up being a very different study, in fact. So what I looked at was the children's reading. I read with the children, and they talked about their reading. It was reading rather than writing. Then 10 years later, that was a year-long study, by the way. Then 10 years later, I went back to ask similar kinds of questions, which I'll show you in a minute. But this time I just researched a school for a term. I won't go into the details, which were a little bit different. But broadly, I was still interested in reading, particularly reading in English, but also the reading children did in their other languages. And in addition, the school asked me to support the reading of, and I put this in quote marks, underachieving boys, their term. It's always boys who underachieve, you notice that. So and some of them actually were very good readers. This was the interesting reading. But anyway, they were so-called underachieving boys, all of whom though had English as a second language. So move on sharply. I'm going to be looking at some vignettes, as I call them, of 4 learners from Holly Tree. The first 3, I have to say, are all from the earlier period. Siraj is from one of the more recent studies of the underachieving boys. We haven't got time to go through this in detail. Mohammed, all the children, in fact, were 9 at the time. I'll just say that I'm still in touch with Mohammed. He's now 25. I've never seen him since then, but we've maintained an email relationship. But that's another story. And he's just got his degree. It's a bit of a struggle. Anyway, I'll move on. So these were the research questions for the study, the 2-phase study at Holly Tree. You see, I was looking at skills, strategies, and resources that the pupils draw on in their reading. How do their cultural and linguistic identities, and that's the focus of what I'm talking about today, mediate in their access and use of text, and links between literacy at school and at home. But today, I'm going to home in on this matter of reader identity. Because EAL learners may experience, in my experience, restricted access at school to rich literacy practices and texts. So this is the dilemma or the problem that underpins this focus of my study today. So slightly different kinds of questions around reader identity. How do the texts we select speak to EAL learners' life experiences? What do texts and kinds of texts, genres, including text topic, excuse me a minute, communicate to our learners, and how can they bridge home and school literacy practices? Now, I'm glad that Raymond talked about identity text, because this matches nicely with what I want to say. And as Raymond was saying, the work by Cummins and Early looks at how learners produce identity text. They create text, especially dual language text. But I want to say that published text, the text that children read, given to read, we can also be seen as identity text. Now, what do I mean by that? If you like, a positive kind of identity text is one where readers can say, I know that person, I know that family, I've been to that place, I've seen that happening. And this takes place, doesn't it, in our own personal reading, when we're engaged with a novel we like very much. I am talking fiction mainly, by the way, you'll see. Identity texts, as I'm calling them, offer more to go to work on, they yield more. They may deal with serious themes such as religion or racism. And they offer access to worlds which resonate with, rather than directly reflect necessarily, learners' life experiences. Now, when I talk about this issue of resonance and relevance, I get worried, like a lot of us do, I think, about the notion of relevance. I'm not talking about relevance. Bean and Money, in this quite well-known paper, which they wrote in Australia, they applaud teen texts which deal with issues which are relevant to teens, racism, pregnancy, and so on, because they provide a roadmap for adolescents coping with these issues in real life. And often we hear this idea that the texts we present to learners need to be relevant in this way, to provide a roadmap. But I don't think so. I think texts don't need to offer a roadmap, rather a cultural atlas opening up a range of cultural and personal journeys. We might call these text worlds. So I'm going to go on to give a few examples. This is a counter-example. Is anybody familiar with Jelly and Bean? No, well, I'm glad you're not. This is a sort of just to say, this isn't my learner. This is 5-year-old Boris, a Russian learner, actually reading with a teaching assistant. But this is the kind of typical diet that a lot of children get, particularly, I would say, EAL pupils. When we did a study of EAL learners, it was a common refrain, this was at IOE, it was a common refrain that EAL learners particularly need phonics. Nobody ever said why. I have not yet heard a reason why EAL learners should particularly need phonics. But this is what he's got here. But imagine trying to connect with Jelly and the rat in the hut, you know. Anyway, I need to say no more. But the kind of thing we are talking about, you'll be very familiar with this kind of, you may know this text. These are a couple of images from Welcome Dee Dee. Do you know this text? There are a number of books like this, but still not enough, surprisingly. And I'm glad I see Raymond nodding. A friend of mine was working as a volunteer now with bilingual children. She says there simply isn't enough material that the children can identify. And this is a rare exception. And we can see how effective it is. We haven't got time to go through the whole dialogue, but Gillian is the teacher here, reading with Casimir from Ghana. And as soon as he sees that picture, we see that he says, oh, my mum can do that, right. And he becomes the expert. You have to put something on your head, a thing on your head, and you have to put it on and it won't fall. He knows all about how you carry things on your head. And then his friend comes in, his schoolmate, also from Ghana, and says, oh my God, it's Ghana. I have seen that lady in Ghana. This is what I mean about, I know that, I've seen her. The sort of thing you can't do with bean and jelly and whatever. So she's seen that money. So this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, that kind of recognizability. But it's not just that, it's what, extending that idea a little bit, what we read about. And I think there's you know, I've gone in schools a lot, I've seen the things that kids like to read and are encouraged to read, and a lot of it's very trivial. But I found when I was reading with Jamila and Varsha, that they, rather to my surprise, were very interested in texts about Christianity, particularly. I should perhaps you remember that Jamila is Muslim, Varsha, the other girl, is Hindu. But when they were choosing their books for reading, which was part of our meetings each week, they chose stories from the Bible. And so that triggers my question. Do you think it's important to read about other religions? Yes, it's very important. And this triggers an extensive conversation, which is quite philosophical, in fact, if you have a chance to read down. Because Jamila at one point challenges me. She said, are you a Christian? And I'm not going to lie. So I say, well, I don't really have a religion. And, anyway, I'm a humanist. And she has no problem in accepting it. So the point I'm making is to be serious. Texts which seriously relate to issues of this kind are perfectly manageable, even by children of the age of 9. Moving on though. This, again, is a counterexample, but it's not quite as bad as Jelly and Bean, but it's very typical of the sort of diet of text that children are faced with in school. And as you see, it's about, I don't know what it's about, actually, but well, it's about bats, sort of. Now, bats are fascinating, but this is a very boring text. And you think, why has somebody written this text? Clearly for school purposes, it has no authenticity. So if you find a bat in your house, you have to, phone this hotline, who will put you in touch with a licensed bat worm. So this was the text they were doing in the literacy hub, by the way. That's where it came from. And this was Mohammed's response. Did you find the text interesting? No, not at all, because I don't hardly see bats. There's no point in me taking this advice because I don't hardly see them. Have you ever seen a bat? Only on TV, not in person. Can you imagine a situation where you would be interested in this kind of text? If I had several bats around my house or living there, I would be interested in them. So you get the point. It's a low yield text, in other words. It gives us nothing. But when Mohammed was reading, he was a very good reader at the age of 9, he was reading Roald Dahl, Danny the Champion of the World. Many of you will know this. And this is just a little extract and an image from the book. Do you know this? Yes. Some of you will. And Dad says to the son in the story, they're talking about poaching. How you go about, he's a gamekeeper. Pheasants, he said, are crazy about raisins, just ordinary raisins. It's like a mania. Now this, the reading of this triggers a very long explanation from Mohammed. He's read the book at home, some time ago, but he's able to recreate that text, even reproduce it quite closely, because it's a text that's been meaningful to him. Even not because of relevance, of course. He's never, been in the country at all. He's a city boy down in Southall. And indeed, when he started reading the story, he says, I didn't know what poaching was, but the text told me. And the text told him, interestingly enough for him, to tell a very complex story about how you catch pheasants with raisins. And it goes on and on. But it's also complex linguistically and cognitively. So he's producing quite, if you're a Bernsteinian, quite elaborated language to tell this story. It's school language, if you like. You can't use a gun because the keepers will catch you, so there has to be another way. So one of the methods is, and so on. But compare this. Horrid Henry, do we know Horrid Henry? Now this is I'm now moving on to Siraj, the boy who had reading problems, if you like. Now this, I'm choosing this example because there's a lot of this kind of stuff about, and I happen to think it's completely inappropriate at the end, or for anybody, anyway. I don't want to be a spoiled book because I think the kids will enjoy it. But there are massive cultural and linguistic difficulties that come through with this kind of text, which oddly don't happen with the very strong narratives of Roald Dahl, for instance. And this is a little sort of moment where Sajid is reading about a christening. You can guess what's coming. And this is what, he reads this perfectly okay. He decodes it, he can read. You're coming to the christening, and that's that. No, screeched Henry. I hate Polly, I hate babies, and I hate you. Henry had met Vera. Vera's the baby, by the way. Odd name for a baby, but she'd thrown up all over him. Henry had hoped never to see her again until she was grown up and behind bars. But no such luck. He had to go and watch her be dumped in a vat of water. Now, I've got to move quickly. It's the vat of water we're going to focus on. So, is that cultural reference going to be accessible to Sajid, who's not a Christian, I should have said? Well, it wasn't, because this was when I asked, why was the baby dumped in the water, I asked, and Sajid said, because she vomited. Remember, the baby was sick. So she was dumped in the water, not for the purpose of christening, but to clean her up. This is a very intelligent response, actually. But because that text is so drenched in complex cultural references, it's very hard for learners like Sachi to make any sense of them. I'm going to move on to Roseland College, where I studied readers again, but this time new arrivals. Roseland College, not its real name, of course, in West London, has a lot of exceptionally large number of new arrivals, and I was interested in how they got on with reading. They could all, by the way, read in their first language. Ibrahim from French Guinea in West Africa, Suresh and Jay were both Sri Lankan ethnically, but this is a very sort of typical trajectory for Suresh. I don't know if you come across the term two-step bilingual, two-step migrants. His family had lived in Germany. Suresh was born in Germany. Suresh came over here, lived with an uncle, and then his family followed. But it means, of course, that his dominant language was German. Jay, on the other hand, spoke very good Tamil, and he had arrived 2 years ago, 2 years previously. So they all had arrived within the last 2 or 3 years, unlike, I should have said, the Holly Tree pupils who were more settled bilinguals. Now, this is going to become a bit relevant later on. He lives with an uncle, Jay, and he has a yearly visa. Now, I'm going to have just time to talk about a couple of texts here, which will be, do you know this one? I'm sure some of you know this. Do you know the poem, anybody? By John Agard. I haven't got time to, and I'd hate to read the poem because I do it so badly. It should be, Sam, do you know the poem? Sam at the back. She's being shy, I mentioned it. It's a wonderful poem, anyway. And it is, the title, I think, is self-explanatory. Now, it's also very difficult, in its language. It's written in a sort of pidgin, stylized Black English, perhaps. But the interesting thing was that Ibrahim had brought in this poem when I'd said to the group, bring in anything you want to read. What have you particularly enjoyed? So even though he's only been in the country about 18 months, if you remember, he's able to read. I've said he reads the poem. Tchaikovsky is referenced in the poem, and I personally hadn't heard it before, and I'm overwhelmed. It's a wonderful poem, and we're able to have quite a rich conversation about this text. And if you look through it, with the others joining in. Ibrahim, he's only sort of repeating the text. Admittedly, he says, like when you say half-caste, you mean Tchaikovsky sat down at the piano and mixed the black keys with the white keys. That's why it's a half-caste symphony. That's a line in the poem. But the interesting part is at the end where Ibrahim says, because you can't use the piano with just black keys and white keys. We need both for harmony. And the last example, is this familiar? Do you know what? It's a play, obviously. It's A View from the Bridge. Now, it's a bit sad for me to show this. I just wanted to have a visual image here. It's sad because the children in this school will probably never get to see a production of a play. It doesn't seem to happen. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think these kids have got that opportunity. But they loved the play. Does anybody know A View from the Bridge? Have you seen it? By Arthur Miller. Now, the surprising thing to me, and it triggered, in fact, my whole study, believe it or not, at Roseland, because Gervais, teacher who was doing a course with me, came and said, I've got 2 pretty new arrivals, they haven't been in the country long, and they love A View from the Bridge. And I was just amazed, because it's an American play, it's set in the 50s, I think. It covers very difficult topics, it's even sort of incest. But it is about immigrants. So there was that kind of hook for the boys, and they could cope amazingly well with the other kinds of complexity. And this is just a little flavour of a conversation we had about this text, where Gervais is the teacher, and I'm there as well later, and we're talking about this identification, which we often is one way into talking about a text. Who would you like to be in the play? And Jay says, I'd like to be Marco. His family, he needs to help his family. He's helping his family. And you need to know that Jay is almost certainly sending money back home. He's helping his family back home. He's living with an uncle in London. And at the Suresh, by the way, gives a rather conventional. This is what Suresh would have been taught in class. This is the sort of conventional view. Eddie, he's an interesting character. He comes in most of the scenes. He changes the story. You can tell that this is the GCSE, you know, tick list, he's supposed to. But Jay's response, I think, is much more interesting, because when I say, could you empathize with the two immigrants, that's Rodolfo and Marco, who arrive in the home of Eddie, if you don't know the story, I said, did you feel you could understand their feelings? I can understand their feelings because they come really to New York. When they come here, they need citizenship. Same here, I need citizenship to stay here to study. I haven't got citizenship yet. I've got yearly visa. So that was what he was taking from that text. That's how that, but lots of other stuff as well. But that was one thing that spoke to him from that text. So to sum up then, and then we'll take some questions. The point I'm trying to make with these few examples is the need to offer EAL pupils access to enriched and expanded text worlds, to good literature, if you like, to good stuff, which I don't think they readily get access to. I know it sounds elitist, even sort of the great text, but I sort of believe in that, in fact. So these texts are culturally resonant, cognitively demanding, effectively engaging, and serve their social, academic, and personal needs and aspirations for the longer term. Okay, thank you very much. Have we got time for some questions? They did a race through.
Yes, yes.
Or comments, or yes.
Yeah, this is a comment, I suppose. I just, given the discourse of the recent piece at SATS, where you would see people talking about them only being relevant to, I think it was white middle class girls, who would have engaged in those texts in the same way.
Which text opinion?
It was the one, I don't know, it was the one that had the white giraffe and the little girl on safari. And I don't know if the white middle class people do. Well, perhaps. And I just wondered this business of relevance and resonance. And some of the argument against that argument, if you will, people are saying it's not relevant to these children. Why are they being given this text? And there was other people saying, well, my kids play Minecraft and it resonates perhaps with them rather than being relevant. And Minecraft is as alien a world to those children as you know, Osafari in South Africa might be to some of the children in schools. I just wondered what your thoughts on that sort of.
No, it's a fair point, and I've sort of rattled through some complex issues really here. Don't get me wrong. I mean, in a way, I may have been inconsistent because I'm saying, you know, mention of christenings. What do they know about christenings? Now they're going to, you know, kids are going to learn about christenings. But I think my problem with some of these popular culture texts, like Horrid Henry, is that they're so elliptical and elusive, incredibly difficult to read if you did a linguistic analysis. There's a very sort of loose narrative there in some of them. And I just think they're terribly hard for that reason. So that kind of cultural elusiveness, that knowingness, it's the cultural knowingness that really irritates me enormously. That's just my personal view. But if it's a question of reading, I mean, in JL, well, that's difficult, I know. But the great books, I don't think we should ever deny those to children. But I don't want to sound Govian either, you know, because in fact, I don't think for GCSE, I think I'm right, they're not Gove prescribed, proscribed a view from the bridge because it was an American text. So he was doing sort of the British, it's got to be Trollope or something. I love Trollope, but anyway, Trollope wouldn't be very appropriate. So that it still needs a lot of thought, I think, to select. But there is a reason I found when I talk to the kids about these texts that are very popular, like Half Caste and A View from the Bridge, of Mice and Men. There's a reason why they endure. And they loved Of Mice and Men as well. That's another story. Yeah,
Just
these children.
to add to that, I'm involved with National Association of Teaching English, and we're putting together at the moment global learning booklets. We've been doing it for years, where we're finding culturally rich texts, which are, and then thinking of access, how to make them accessible.
Right.
And that's something they spend a lot of time doing, and supporting the making these challenging texts, not as challenging, but they're finding ways in, finding books, but so those certain children can find ways in. I mean,
terrific, thank you for that. I know my colleague, and I know Stuart listened to John Randall. He also writes about, some of these texts, If You From the Bridge and Half Caste in a book that he's done.
I know Howard Henry.
Sorry?
I know Howard Henry.
And you think it's all right?
Well done. But how do I find what books would benefit EL students? I mean, I don't know anything about their culture, so where can I go to get these books or listen to these books?
It is. I'm looking at Raymond because I know she knows a lot about children's books, and there are great storybooks, there are folklore and that kind of thing. But there still is a dearth of, or maybe, as far as I can see, when I did the library reading, with the underachieving boys, we ended up with Horrid Henry an awful lot of the time. And I didn't want to say take it away, obviously, because the whole point was reading for pleasure and reading for fun. But I became very aware of the very restricted sort of diet that was available. I mean, it's great to have fun, and Roald Dahl is great fun. But Roald Dahl also has rich language and narrative, and it's, it speaks in a different kind of way to the children. And it isn't culturally obscure in quite the same way as some of these Horrid Henry. I'm not answering your question.
No, I agree. Because it does get them to develop their language. It's beautiful, and it's amusing, but I don't know how to find alternative books.
Yes.
That's why I don't know where to go for a list of books that would be suitable.
I think especially for upper primary, really, there's great picture books, but does anybody know of books that have more purchase, more?
Let's take last
Yes,
one.
Jane.
I just wanted, I know my colleague, for her daughter's 3-year-old birthday, I gave her Beatrix Potter's Peter Rabbit, and she's become obsessed by Peter Rabbit. She's read the whole Beatrix Potter, that's Andrew listened to her, the whole Beatrix Potter collection. She loves the pictures and images, and I think there's some wonderful kind of children's classics which have fallen out of interest, but they survive for a reason, actually. I mean, Winnie the Pooh pays, revisited, and it's beautifully illustrated, and it's got a huge depth, which is wonderful even to read as an adult. And so I think some of those classics that we loved as children, we might return to.
I mean, it's interesting because we tended to avoid them because they're so elitist and middle class. But maybe not. Maybe because they are originals. There's somebody.
Sorry, just in response to the lady's question about where to source the book, there is quite a movement. You're very right, there isn't enough at the minute, and there hasn't been for a very long time. But there is quite a movement towards trying to rectify that. And so there are organisations that are trying to raise their profile and source publishers who are interested in that. So people like Letterbox Library, Wellston Bookshop, Tamarind Press, Tara Press, Tiny Owl publishers who are trying to bring more Iranian literature into picture book world. And CLP have an online called Booklist where you can see books organised, literature organised across different age ranges.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's brilliant report. I mean, thank you very much. We'll bring it to I'm sure we should pick up on some of these issues. I'll put it all later on. That's my job. Thank you very much. So I'd just like to introduce Therese from Oxford University down here, although you haven't come from down here today. You've been travelling around a bit, I think, from Norway, etc. Well, thank you very much for coming today, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here together with you today, and I already have captured so many interesting questions. I've taken notes, so appreciate that. What I would like to speak to you about today is a study which we are conducting at our centre in Oxford. So I'm speaking on behalf of a team here which are working on something called pearls. And before I start working, I'm just curious in the audience, how many of you have heard about pearls?
I haven't read the abstract, so.
Well, I find that very interesting because usually when we are around talking about international large-scale studies, more people have heard about PISA. So I guess if I said PISA, more of you would have known. But pearls are a study which some say is the PISA's little stepsister, doesn't get that much attention. But sometimes I think perhaps this is even more interesting because it targets younger students. So what I would like to talk to you about today is a little bit of the background and why we think this might be interesting for teachers. So PEARLS is a Sense of Progress for International Reading Literacy, and it's conducted by IEA, which is an organization in Boston. It goes on every 5th year, 2001, 2006, 2011, and as we speak, this week there are a collection of data in England. England takes part of this, so perhaps you know some schools who now have people actually conducting this test at their schools. They are in year 5 and they are around 10 years old when they sit for this test, and it's basically an assessment of reading and also reading comprehension. And what might be interesting for you today is that they do have questionnaire, which the students are responding to, where they collect data about how many students are speaking English at home. So even if it's not a very, very good measure, you will have a Likert scale where they're supposed to say whether they never speak English at home, whether they always speak English at home, or whether they seldom speak English at home. And based upon that, we know that approximately 20% of the students who participate in PEARLS, they are probably having English as an additional language. But the sad thing for us as researchers is that when PEARLS are published, the results of PEARLS are published, this is usually what you will find in the media. There's really only very little information, and when it's information, it's very often blaming schools or teachers who are not doing their jobs properly, very often compared to other countries, suggesting that other countries do better. But if we look at what this study is really measuring, it's really, really sad. It's a little bit like this is the whole picture, which is publicly known. And again, you will just see that the average scale score on reading proficiency are compared across participating countries. And then, like this one is taken from the English report from 2011, this is where the focus is. But we know that this information here about reading proficiency, it has so much more to offer both researchers and teachers than just this ranking. So, from a research point of view, we would like to know more. What does this really mean? And one of the things which is interesting in England is that there's such a wide distribution of scores in England. So if we compare to other countries, they might have the same mean score, but students are more kind of clustered in the mean altogether. What is challenging in England is that you have some students who are performing really, really poorly, and you have some of the best readers in the world. And what does that really mean for us as a country? Another thing is that you had also the proportion of pupils failing to meet the low international benchmark. It is very much similar to the amount who is not achieving level 3 or above in national curriculum tests. So when you also compare results from these PEARLS, you can also compare it to other studies and see that, yeah, it makes sense here, but it also gives the message that we have something which we need to look into, because this is really challenging for a lot of students. And then if we go to the results from Pearls and look at our different pupils and what they read, we can look at the results from 2001 and 2011, and we will see that students who reported that they sometimes speak English at home has risen, as you will see. Around 20%, we expect it to be even higher in 2016, depending a little bit on the sample. There is going to be approximately 4,000 people sitting for this test. But what you will also see is that the students who report that they sometimes speak English at home, they are the ones who perform a little bit less good than students who speak English at home, which is not a surprise to us. But we need to know more about this. So the question is, what can we really take from Pearls and how can we work with this also together with teachers? So this was the background that for us researchers at the Department of Education, we really wanted to see, is there more we can do? And being the National Centre for Pearls in England at our centre, we really wanted to engage with teachers in a better way than we had seen in England. One of the reasons I have to say is that my co-researchers, for instance, Jenny Lenke, she's from Germany. I'm originally from Norway, and we both come from traditions where these results are taken differently in our country. We are used to a lot more exchange of results between the researchers and the teachers in both Norway and Germany. The reports are written differently with more engagement together with researchers, and we're kind of questioning, isn't it possible to do something different also in England? So we looked at a possibility of developing a project, and this is the project, Pearls for Teachers. So if you're interested, please go to our website. We have a website where you can follow both the process, what's going on, and also the results, which will be published the rest of the year. We wanted to have a look at other countries and what they were doing to engage with practitioners. And we wanted also to engage teachers in understanding Pearls findings. And we also wanted to know, what does teachers find interesting? What is important for them to know about things which go beyond the league tables? And we wanted to identify useful knowledge for teachers. It's a little bit like here when someone says that, well, as a teacher, I need to know about good texts to offer students, That's how teachers are thinking. And that's also their job. And then now we are here in the phase that we are developing materials to support teachers, and we're doing it together with teachers. So we also look at what can we find in the media and what is available for practitioners, and we saw that we're a knowledge gap here. We also looked at what researchers were doing, and we just published a review, which I will tell you a little bit about, and we could see that researchers were engaging with Pearls, but not much of that is actually reaching the schools. So we see that there are knowledge gap in so many levels, and that is why we wanted to work more on it. I mentioned this publication we just have been working on. We did a review. This is the team in Oxford who's been working a lot on Pearls. And we found that it was more than 114 peer-reviewed journal articles which have been published on Pearls. And we saw that particularly Germany and the United States had engaged with Pearls, but we also saw that it's mostly used for secondary data analysis. And it's hardly used for reading research. And we find that extremely strange. If this is like the biggest reading research internationally comparative study we have, why on earth are we not using it more? And also, we looked at what are people engaged in. So from a research point of view, we found 3 different categories. It's basically secondary data analysis, it's critique of Pearls, which is of course important, and it's also impact or policy studies. But as you can see, very little which has relevance to teachers in the classroom on how to improve reading. Further, you will see that there's steadily increased amount of published peer review articles, but again, knowing what they are publishing on, it has so far not been much which we can offer schools on how to improve reading. So we wanted to do something about this. And that's why we have been engaging with teachers in Oxfordshire on how to make better sense of the results coming out from Pearls. We had a workshop last year where we sat down and went through the whole pro study. We showed teachers the questionnaires, which students report about their language at home, about their interest in reading, how much they like to read, and we also then show them released items from PEARLS and discussed both how these were scored, what kind of format they were on, and how they would interpret these tasks in their own class. And we also discussed their results. We shared results from England and discussed with the teachers, how do you interpret these results? And also we asked them, from your point of view, what would be interesting for you to find out and to know to improve your own teaching and reading in your classroom? And that was extremely interesting. Because of course, the teachers had completely different perspectives on this research than we as researchers had. And that's where the really knowledge exchange is so interesting. We shared information about how they define reading comprehension in the study. So we talked about what is measured, the different reading purposes, reading for literacy experience, and reading to acquire and use information. And that is also why I thought it was really interesting to listen to the different conversations here today, and also thinking about the tasks of testing factual knowledge, and also then having these rich texts, which we just saw, and also thinking about how people feel and how the students feel about reading these things. We also then can look at reading comprehension processes. There are questions here about how students are actually using strategies to understand and comprehend. And you can see that they try to have text like this, fly, eagle fly, and African tail. They try to have different texts in this study, so they will capture also interest from students coming from a varied background. But the teachers said very clearly, they wanted us to do analysis of PEARLS from 2011, and they wanted to know more about how enjoyment for reading affected the reading scores. So one of the first things we actually looked at was how pupils reported how much they were engaged and whether they liked reading and whether that had anything connections to the scores in PEARLS. And then on the second workshop, when the teachers were coming back, we discussed the analysis of the results. And this is just to give you a flavor of our discussion. What we saw is that it's positively related to pupils, whether they like to read, and also it's positively related to whether they speak English at home. But what is not a surprise to us, as you will probably know, that this group, boys with few books at home, this is also something they reported to us in a questionnaire, if they like what they're reading, they do better. And also, this thing, giving people's time to read books they choose on their own, that does not influence the score. And that is interesting based upon the discussion we had, because very often, if you give students choices, that is good, of course, but very often they then pick easy reads, and they need to be challenged. So this is just a reminder for us that what we find in the PEARLS study, it's also linked to what we know from reading research. The other thing the teachers were really interested in, and that is also linked to policy about reading, they wanted to know whether use of computers had any impact at all on the reading achievement scores in PEARLS. And they also wanted to know whether it was differences between boys and girls. And in general, what we find is that there are almost no link between use of computer and their reading scores in PEARLS. What is really affecting whether they're doing well or not is actually how many books they have at home and the language they speak at home. So if we look a little bit more into this, there are even some scales here which are negative. So, for instance, for some of the boys, and computer use, it is negatively correlated. And if we look at some of the studies, we know that a lot of the computer use is not, it doesn't support reading. It's a lot of other things they're doing online. So when we use computer, it's so much dependent on how the teacher in the classroom are using it to enhance reading. But just to give you a flavor, since all of you have kind of had example, I brought some example of texts which are given on pearls. And this is the story which many of the students like. It's the African tale, Fly, Eagle, Fly. And we actually have one hypothesis as researchers, whether fairy tales or other tales which have a very specific composition is easier to understand for students with English as an additional language. This is the text, the introduction of the text, and this is a typical pearls item with multiple choice. If you look here, you will remember from the text what's the correct response. And if you look here, we have analyzed and shown all the teachers that girls overall have higher correct response rate here than the boys, slightly better. But if you look at the one which always speaks English at home and sometimes English at home, you will also see that there's a difference here. But if we look at some other items, we can also see that, or this, we would say the same task. If we look at how they liked this one, you will see that this purple liked it a lot. You will see that depending upon how many books they have at home, this is books, you will see that it's not that big difference, but when they have more than 100 books at home, they do like it a little bit more, and the group who does not like it are among the students who do not have books at home. But there are slightly gender differences in liking this story. But even more interestingly, I think, is this one. If you look at this purple here, it shows all the students who sometimes speak English at home. They like this African tale better than English-speaking students who always speak English at home. So suddenly, when we discussed with the teacher on item level, we were able to find what kind of tasks from pearls the students with English as an additional language prefer, and this one was the task they liked the best. We do not know why, but we think it gives us additional research questions to go on and move on and actually do analysis of the whole text and think what would be interesting and what motivates these kids to read, and how does this actually affect also the outcome. Just going to show you another one, which is called Anime Pie. This text is a little bit interesting because it's a story about a boy who has a new boy coming in as a neighbor, and then he's a little bit sad because suddenly there's a third boy coming also, and they are not all together friends. And the father tells the son that I know a way of you can solve your problem, and the problem is to bake a pie, which is called the anime pie. It ends up that by baking this pie and giving it to one who has been coming as a newcomer, they make friends. So really this enemy pie is really something which makes them friends instead of enemies. But the interesting part with this story is that when we looked at, again, the tasks, as here we have also open response, and when we did the analysis, we could see that girls had overall higher correct on this one, but look here, always English and sometimes English, there are no differences in this one. So this was a task where we didn't find any differences, and we thought that was really interesting, but it's absolutely a task which we did further analysis on because there are gender differences. And this is about interpreting a story. So this is something which teachers also picked up on and thought was really interesting because they related that to their own teaching, and we started discussing what kind of texts are they using, what kind of texts are they using together with their students use English as a secondary language, and what kind of text do they offer boys and girls. Another thing which we offered was to read and critique the scoring guide in these tests. I won't show you much of this. I will just say that all of these are publicly available. And one of the really interesting things here is that teachers really discussed this and critiqued it. And their critique of this test also gave us new questions to work on as researchers. I will just mention that, of course, we found also text in Pearls, like this one on factual knowledge about fossils, where we saw that there again was text which was really enjoyed reading. And it doesn't come as a surprise to us, but again, it just relates to what we know from reading research. I think I will summarize by saying that teachers really would like ideas for practitioners. And we do understand that, but sometimes, I've been very happy sometimes when I've heard Vicky Murphy has said that it's not us which are experts on how to do in the classroom, that is really the teachers. We can offer research and what we know from research, but how to do it, that is really the teachers who are the experts. But that is also why this is an interesting project, because we have this knowledge exchange going both ways. One of the things which we could offer was that we found that the report in Australia was written for the Australian readers, also with examples from, as you can see, fly, eagle, fly, but with text which practitioners and readers, teachers, researchers could read, and then offered examples and interpretations and discussions for how teachers could work on it. And it also showed, like in Australia, it was 25% of the students were able to do this one, while in Hong Kong it was 59% of the students. And then you can have a discussion going on also, what does it mean, why is it like that? We also have a discussion around some of the big names in reading research, like Professor David Pearson at Berkeley. We have shared some of his research with our teachers to show what research can offer, and that is also because he's been working very closely with teachers, so he's good at applying his research findings to how you can do things in school. And finally, we are discussing now what next, because in 2016, the report will be written, and in 2017, December, it will be published and available. So perhaps in 2016, October, you will come to our department and come to one of our public seminars when we will also tell about the event and what we have been doing so far, and also perhaps you can meet some of our colleagues. If you're interested, please be in touch. Thank you.
Some time for a few questions.
Yes, I mean, the issue of books at home is tricky, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
that was a discussion I had with quite a lot of the children in the last study.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, these were poor children. You probably realised that in the school in Southall. And some of them would say they might have 2 or 3 books in English at home, and they have a religious book. But then another child would say, well, I've got a shelf of books, you know. But even that would be seen quite a lot. And we know that middle class children have hundreds of books. And the question really is about libraries, the use of libraries, which we know threaten now, and what role might they play? I know parents, I see them, they do, particularly, I think, minority parents do use libraries a lot. So I don't know, just really comments around that, because the reality is that there are a lot of folks down there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of published articles I've published myself critiquing self-reports, and the younger they are, here they are 10 years old, they're reporting about their family background, books at home, all this. We know that they're always a little bit biased and always a little bit tricky to collect data, but so far the construct books at home correlates amazingly high, both in PISA and Pearls, as an indicator. So that's why it's still in there. But I know some of the colleagues from Scandinavia now, Sweden and Norway particularly, are saying it doesn't work very well any longer, because now there's so many of the wealthy families who give away all their books because it's not modern any longer to have the bookshelves at home. They read on their different tools, and they just have art instead on the walls, and the books are out. So it's discussions going on whether they should have different measures for that.
Oh, as a criterion, but you're saying that it's actually correlated pretty well as
Yes,
sort of even with the over-reporting problem.
Yeah.
recycling,
Yeah, I mean, I used to work also with PISA data, and sometimes there were jokes that we don't need this whole questionnaire on 100 items. We can just ask them, how many books do you have at home? Because internationally, across 70 countries, it's the item which can predict the outcome in science, learning, mathematics. Yeah.
I mean, I always found in primary school, one of the best things was to bring and buy sales with the HSA organised. Why on earth isn't that being done more? Because that's sort of 50p. There's no excuse. I mean, there is an excuse, but really, that's self-help in a way. Just have the literacy coordinators organise the HSA to do bring and buy sales, which a lot of schools don't do. They bring in these commercial organisations to sell. You know, they well, this is primary school all the time, which is pissing me off.
Well, this is the way the market is taking over.
Taking over. You know, once you leave primary school, you've got this whole bookshelf, you don't know what to do with it. Send it down to the primary school. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I think maybe you should want an expert. Our last section we'd like to do is to pull things together over the next 20 minutes or so. We're just about on time now. Feel free if you do want to replenish your cup of water, but we'll try and just keep moving if we can. Hamish has volunteered to run a sort of a dialogue session here, so please, it's going to depend upon everybody contributing to kind of summarise the day and where we are. And we aim to finish by 1:45, when I'll just wind it up with just some information about what we're doing here, contacts with emails and things like that. That's what we're going.
Thank you very much. Given the task a few months ago by Anna, said, could you just do the summing up at the end? I said, of course I can, no problem. I'm very, very happy to do that. And I've been sitting here with paper and marks, and I've got all of it, and how can one sum up such a full and rich and fascinating day? I mean, there really has been, for me as a researcher, it's just been great to hear about different points of view about these interrelated themes within the educational model. And we build this as an opportunity for three very sort of distinct but nonetheless related areas to talk to each other and to learn from each other. So I certainly have, and I hope you have too. And so I'm going to try now to give you a summary, but I'm sure if I was allowed free rein, then I would certainly get to kick off time with England versus who is it tonight? Can't miss it. That's the only game. So I will promise to finish before kickoff. I don't mind that, and I was expecting this to be sort of nice and there's lines across there. So what I'm going to try and do is just to sort of summarise what we've learned today, and then I'm going to give you some provocation questions, really, to talk about with your colleagues who are sitting near, and then we can have a sort of an open-ish discussion at the end there to see whether we can, what we take forward from this. I don't know whether it was by design or whether it was an accident, but I thought the way the day was organised in terms of who spoke when was brilliant, because I've got this is how I'm not actually joking, this is really sort of, it's a circle, and everything led on to the next thing, and there were things that were resonating throughout the day, we were pulling back. So we started with Vicky giving us an overview of Steve Strand's work looking at the National Pupil Database to identify who are we talking about. I'm drafting an article at the moment, and I found myself writing the phrase EAL is such essentially a useless term without qualification. What does EAL mean in our terms? And we're talking about this massive range of people. So to have a breakdown of that data, to say, well, these my children are EAL by definition, because they grew up speaking Thai for 2 years. They're not anymore. They're monolingual English. Unfortunately, they're sequential monolingual. Very embarrassing for me. Yes. But and then there's people like you said, coming out of Syria and so on. Very different profiles. So to hear a little bit more about that was very interesting. And then also to hear about Vicky's and Adam's systematic review of what do we know. And if we're going to be thinking about setting research agenda, in our country, in the UK, we need to know what we know already, so that we don't replicate unnecessarily, but we also need to know where those gaps are, so that we can target our research, so that we actually make a difference. I'm an unashamed empiricist. I like to know what's going to work in my classroom tomorrow. What am I going to do? What's the effect going to be of doing A, B, or C? And so to find out that actually within the context of the UK, really we don't know. It's on the one hand absolutely emancipating as a researcher, because I can just throw a dart at some sort of themes, and then there you go, there's a research project. But we learned later on in the day about how that can be sort of narrowed down a bit. The idea that at the end of the monolingual hegemony, which ties in very nicely with the idea of multilingual turn, which I'm sure that everybody is familiar with, the idea that looking at the world through a monolingual lens is not very sensible, because multilingual people outnumber monolingual people by orders of magnitude. And then we, as a good illustration of that, we have Anna's talk about community schools. And this idea of cultural awareness and metalinguistic awareness. And I thought that was a really nice way that we were bringing these two things together. So it's not just about people and valuing people for who they are, but it's actually, there is a utility to this proficiency in more than one language. What was particularly important from that talk for me was the idea of advocacy for multilingual learners. And that the advocacy was not coming from the top. The advocacy was coming from the grassroots. And I didn't mean to be rude about advocacy for multilingual learners in general in this country by saying there wasn't any. Of course there is. But I see that as being little pockets that aren't, as Anna was saying, shouting loud enough to make things happen. And I think that there's strength in numbers. And so a gathering like this today just demonstrates and illustrates the numbers that we have, and that a voice for multilingual learners can be very loud. And then this notion of grassroots change led very nicely to James' talk about Hawaii and New Master, and that where it was successful, where this idea of pulling in multilingualism, about pulling in intercultural awareness, came from this very strong advocacy from Hawaiian parents and their children, I guess, in Hawaii to sort of actually push this forward. It reminded me, as I said at the time, of New Zealand, where there's been this sort of very important and effective push towards Maori education. Jane was talking about the hula dancing. Well, I taught in Thailand for a long time, and we had a partnership with the New Zealand school. They brought some of their children over to stay with us. And the first thing they did, they were straight off the plane from New Zealand, which was about 13 or 14 hour, if not longer, flight from Auckland to Bangkok. And the first thing they did, they went into our assembly hall and they did a dance of the equivalent of the hula dance, I guess, which was rich and full in meaning and cultural identity. And wasn't, these again were 14-year-old boys who had no problem wearing grass skirts with their top off and doing this dancing. It was part of them, which I thought was a beacon of hope in that talk. But then the flip side to that beacon of hope was the experience in New Master, where TAs, multilingual teachers were on board, but getting buy-in and support and momentum from SLT was much more complicated. And that then took us to Peter's talk about getting the buy-in from the top, getting those advocates who have got power, the power-wielding people. You reminded me of a quote from Ben Goldacre, who is someone who you may have heard. He says, "Sunlight is the best disinfectant." And what he means by that is you shine a light on those people who are festering away and making things rotten. And that will help. And I think that's right. I think that we have this notion of shining lights on people who are not standing up for this 1 in 6 children in our education system. This idea that these people, these children and young adults are invisible is nonsense. But we do need to take the light out, shine it on those people, on the people who are denying this as a fact. So, co-opting the power levels, that's something which I think we need to think about. How can we do that? Increasing the advocacy. And then I think that we by doing that, then we start to get some idea about raising the level of attainment for the children and closing that gap for those children that you pointed out from Steve's to work with this gap that shouldn't be there. Raymond told us about home involvement and about, which I thought linked back again to this idea of grassroots and working together to push forward research agenda and to push forward the visibility of this as a normal, unexceptional part of our job as teachers, educators, and involved in research. Acknowledging those languages and pride in those languages. Again, and that was then taking us back to things that have been said previously, particularly by Hannah, but by all. The notion that there is pride there and things can happen when you tap into that pride. And I thought that was a very powerful, powerful message. What was also, you talking about the wielding of power and pulling in power, reminded me just briefly of David Blunkett. When I was a very young teacher, and I just qualified as a primary school teacher in '97, the Secretary for Education was blind, and it happened to coincide with a big move for inclusion, for children with physical and learning difficulties to be included in mainstream classrooms. Now, I don't think that was an accident, that you had somebody who empathised with the plight of children who were in our mainstream school system, pushing for their inclusion and for their acknowledgement. And I think if we can find, it's such a shame that Nick Clegg crashed and burned so badly, because he would have been a lovely advocate in the highest levels of power, because he's a Muslim himself. It's finding those people to do that and to bring the home life back into the education life. Because it's not something that's going to go away. I'm sad that Tracy Cosman has had to go home to get a train today, because Tracy wrote a fabulous article in Language and Education, 2013, which sort of tracked the history of EAL provision. And she talks about that time when, at the beginning, when it was the boats coming over from the Caribbean, the assumption by people in England or the UK was that immigrants were going to come, stay, have a lovely time, and then go home, which wasn't true then. It certainly isn't true now. Tracy Cosby. She's, and it's a great sort of account of our history, and the idea that that people coming to the UK were going to come over just not on a permanent basis was a nonsense then. It's nonsense now. But people in government still behave as if it's. This is the truth. Just look at the discourse around immigration at the moment, and you'll see that there is this notion that we are a sort of benign host, but don't overstay your welcome. And I think that doesn't help anybody. Oksana talks about the tension between knowledge and proficiency in language, the knowledge of the curriculum and proficiency in English, and how we are doing, when we look at the data sets, we look at the achievement of our EAL children, if we are basing that on the ability to pass a SAT, then we're not doing a very good job, because, as she showed, we can demonstrate knowledge. You can have knowledge, you just might not be able to demonstrate it appropriately. Certainly not if you're going to stick very, very closely to the marking on the SATs. This is not going to help us. It's not going to help as teachers, as people involved in education of young people. It's not going to help you improve either. Kathy returns to the idea of relevance and resonance, language awareness. So we got these ideas of the person, the learner as an individual, and their engagement in their education, their engagement in their language. Are we giving our children things which are relevant and have resonance with them? And is there important lessons for us as pedagogues to take forward? And I love the term, the enriched and expanded text worlds there. I think that enriching and expanding their text worlds in whatever way works best is the thing that we should be thinking about. And then that takes me on to, you then reminded me about what Vicky was saying, and this is about my unashamed empiricism, because I want to know what works best. I want to know whether using a particular text is going to result in increased literacy scores for my children. That's my job as a teacher. That's really important. So back to these huge gaps in the research literature around teaching multilingual learning in our schools, whether it be mainstream schools, complementary schools, or in the international schools. And then Teresa broke down some of the data again, which echoed back to what Vicky was saying at the beginning, but also the thing that I thought was both the real point that sort of struck me from your talk, Teresa, was the idea of teacher engagement in all of this. And I'm just absolutely delighted that we've got representatives from local schools here. It's brilliant, because we can sit in our ivory towers and come up with lovely research projects to do. If they don't have utility for our colleagues in schools at the short face, then what are we doing? And again, that's you know, we build the theories and we should look at what happens and we should describe practices in schools. Then what do we do with that? Well, I think we should ask teachers to tell us what to do with that information, and we go and research things that are going to help them do the job that we want them to do as best as they can, which is educate our multilingual learners. And so that notion of teacher engagement in research is brilliant. It makes me a bit sad because it was such a hard job to get the message to schools here. You know, I say, well, you know, there must be a big red button that says EAL teachers. I'd be pressed, and it would call them all to arms, and they would come, and they would have a lovely time, and they would learn all about EAL and teaching multilingual learners. But there isn't. And it was a devil's own job to get the message out, quite apart from what the message was out, to encourage people to come along. And so I think there's definitely, for me, there's a job there for us as a community, is to build these networks, shout loud so that things can happen. So that's kind of my summary and my personal take on today. I'm going to give you 5 provocation questions, which you're free to address or ignore completely, think of your own things, which I'd like you to provoke you into discussion in your tables. And then in the last 5 minutes, perhaps we'll have a, what's in that one? Yeah. We've had some ideas thrown out, okay? So my first question was: the success in Hawaii and of complementary schools was about mass advocacy. How do we translate this into bigger advocacy? So, well, not matter, it was a critical mass of advocacy within those different contexts. How can that be expanded on? How do we shine a light, as Peter says, on the negative forces? How do we use sunlight to disinfect the things that are corrupting our good deeds? How do we engage stakeholders or teachers? And how can we break down the monolingual hegemony and actually embrace the multilingual tone? Is it possible in a little island like ours, full of little Englanders? No, not full of little Englanders. They're just loud. And they get on TV and they shout and they spout nonsense. How do we overcome that? I was having a Twitter conversation with Diane Legan, who, if you have anything to do with this country, you will know who Diane Legan is. And we were talking about, why do we talk about the bilingual advantage? Why don't we talk about the monolingual disadvantage? Why don't we say being monolingual means your executive function's not very good? You know, why do we other multilinguals and say, well, if they're good multilinguals, and the ones we like, then they have better executive control, and they're better at this, that, and the other. And we never say, oh, you know, that's tantamount to child abuse, the fact that you're only teaching your child one language. There's my provocation. Please.
Some reason is this there are also microphones in the ceiling that's not here. Now they're on. It's not at all.
Is that what I lecture?
That's a nice one.
That's always.
We're still going to think at school level, it's important to, if I was going to shine a light. Another thing Jenny done before us, look at what the difference is between a student community and professional learning. Should understand why bringing a paradigm into society and actually as an institution, looking at what are the characteristics of the pseudo community. The pseudo community is one where we're pretending we're professionals, we're pretending we're all pushing ourselves, we're having this conversation. But in fact, we gossip about people yes, we don't do conflict, we do conflict privately. We don't and to use paradigms such as this to analyze what we have right now, the other end of the scale here, religion says, and doing an assessment of what's going on in the institution. Now that's possible do this and are willing to take it on chance and are willing to have a real conversation now I feel succeed in doing use paradigms.
Right.
But it's a knowledge, we have a knowledge of state and change. What kind of effort is required?
Right, I'm really sorry to cut into this one. I know that I was extremely pleased by giving you 4 really complicated questions and basically said, please solve the world's problems, you've got 5 minutes. But we do need to finish at some point today. So I would just like to have some thoughts from your discussions. And please, I think, can we have a free-form discussion on this one? Or would you like to choose one? Okay, well, some people like to kick off. Any thoughts about any of those questions, or indeed any other?
Sorry, Hamish, you gave us 5 questions. Is that time to discuss? It's fairly long.
I know. You can't solve all the problems with one question. Well,
See, this is exactly what you were saying is wrong, is that teachers are given no time in which to make effect change, basically. Because they have to, even if they participate in CPD, Sam was saying, sorry, Sam, you say it.
Sorry, I no apology. Well, I just said sorry. So I take that back. I am a pessimist. Letting everyone know. I was saying that in terms of the question about advocacy, Jane made the point earlier about the time that it takes to build and establish whatever it is you're trying to do, whatever you're advocating for, and in the current climate, whereby you have to show short-term gains constantly, and things be improving so rapidly. How do you convince senior leaders? How do you convince managers that if we're going to move towards, making this kind of context in our school, it's not going to show results in 6 weeks after 3 sessions of CPD. It's going to take a year or two, or however long it's going to take, but there just doesn't seem to be room for that. And so that would be my
I think it's 40 years, yeah? In order to do it. I don't think that's, for me, that's not limited to the AL, that's about education. If people in charge understood education, we might be onto something.
I'm not saying don't try, that's, to be clear, I'm just saying that's my pessimism,
One of the things I don't understand in some ways is why it hasn't been possible. I sit and listen to colleagues in various universities in the UK go on and on about how they're not listened to. How their researchers show this, but government isn't taking notes. I would throw back the challenge and say, all right, you haven't been able to get the message across. What is it going to take to get the message across? How will we organize ourselves so that message gets across? I think there needs to be a much stronger understanding of what the change process is, the literature on change management, the literature on how thinking is formed, how we're immune to change. I'm going to zero into the school for a moment, just because that was a very big picture thing. One thing I've done inside of institutions is take a paradigm, like pseudo-community versus professional development. My goodness, I've lost the term. Pseudo-community versus a professional learning community. And look at the characteristics of a pseudo-community. And there are characteristics such as we move conflict to the back room. We don't talk about how we actually teach. We talk in generalities as opposed to talking in specifics. We keep our classroom doors shut. You use a paradigm to analyze what's going on. And you say, look, a professional learning community at the other end of the continuum looks like this. Where do we fall on this continuum? How are we going to change? How do you get open dialogue going? Including doing some anonymous surveys so leaders are aware of the fact whether they're undermining or not. Leaders in schools are very often have the impression that they're very open. I have an open door policy. I worked in one of those schools. Yes, he did have an open door policy when he wasn't in his office. And I damn well not raise any really difficult issue because I'd be killed for it, is what I learned very quickly. But in other words, I find that paradigms are helpful. I find that having then a thorough analysis using some of these paradigms, having facilitators from the outside is very often helpful, and creating situations where people get 360-degree feedback, where you can't hide, where that sunlight, that disinfectant is shone on. It's not easy to look at yourself and grow and change. I don't know. I jump from the whole system to saying that I think we as institutions or universities, the academics, the people who are active in society at school level need to somehow or other also come together and work and think about what's not working and take some more responsibility, not just complain.
Yeah. Well, we'd like complaining teachers.
Well, everybody likes to complain everywhere. I wouldn't beat yourself up for it. It's a great pastime.
Any thoughts from chalk faces? Anyone here at the chalk face in the classroom?
But yeah, you see, that's not fair, is it? Because you know, teaching our students, you shouldn't pick them up. Because there was something going,
yeah.
Back to you.
Okay,
But is there a bottom-up advocacy, grassroots in the 70s and 80s? I mean, where's that gone again. For example, it's still around, but is there more that could be done? For example, I mean, we were just talking again about books that students like to read, that resonate with certain cultural backgrounds, if they're immigrant. Well, surely a self-made list on that, every EL teacher in the country finds one book that they found resonates with a certain student. Surely that list, exactly. Well, I mean, surely then it just is collated, and then does it have to be someone from above that comes in?
It doesn't have to be, but if you're trying to change something, there still needs to be a central node. And the central node doesn't have to be up here. It can be all the language network deciding that it's going to do it, or someone else here taking that responsibility and having some knowledge about how to spread the news.
I sort of have that optimism that the Education and Government Foundation is trying to do that. It's an arm's length, it's supposed to have nothing to do with the government, it's money for the government. Because what they've done is come up with a kind of a rich guide to how to act in the classroom. So they've got the cost and the research evidence for different ways of teaching.
Oh, sorry, I missed that, Stuart. Who've done that?
The Education and Government Foundation.
Oh,
okay. They've got a teacher learning toolkit. And I'm happy to say that I'm on it, and I'm cheap. There is a lot of evidence to support what I do. Now, it seems to me this doesn't relate to EAL at the moment. There isn't anything, there isn't an EAL element. But the things in that particular checklist, the things that make the biggest difference for the white monolingual, well, the black monolingual, was monolinguals anyway, is often, very often, the same as what benefits your pupils. Metalinguistic awareness, we've had good examples of it today. Talk in the classroom, what were the other ones? Feedback. Or feedback. Yeah, that was a nice one. The things that involve conversations, interactions, and nurture.
Oh, it brings to mind a comment that I can't remember. Good teaching, good EAL teaching is good teaching.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the way around.
Yes.
Yes.
So I sort of see them as being a possible advocate that I'm supporting.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see the EAL groups sort of moving into it.
Well, they did a funding round about 6 months ago. Is that about right? 6 months, where they put out 10 of the 5 projects, and so they've got 5 projects on the EAL.
So keep it.
3, is it?
3 projects.
One of yours is funded by them.
Yeah.
Well, we did the initial reports. That was the springboard from which the call came. So we had 3 projects. And I mean, again, for more, not to be pessimistic, I mean, those reports were discussed in a parliamentary committee. And the Education Endowment Foundation has invested a lot of money to trial these 3 different interventions in different places in England to see how effective they may be. And, you know, we'll watch this space to see how effective they are and what happens as a consequence. And hopefully something positive will come.
I personally hold that thing, Education Endowment Foundation, not least because Kevin Collins, the director, did his PhD on bilingual education and worked in, what was it? Southampton. So he's a good everyone. Anyway, I think we could go on all night. We can't because England are playing. Paul, thank you.
Just the last thing. Thank you very much for coming today. I hope it's been useful. There's just 2 bits of housekeeping. I would like to circulate an email list for all attendees, if you don't mind. If you do, just email me. I'll take your name off the list because some people don't like having their email on the track. I will just try and get that list out. Also, those that were presenters, we will put this together. It's run at the moment as a complete video. We will link it to the talk so you can click on the talks and see each talk. I will send an individual email to each presenter just checking that that's okay. If there's a negative response, I don't hear from you. I'll take that as a yes at the moment. So if anyone's desperate to say no, I'll wait a week or so, but if I don't hear anything, I will release it. So thank you very much for coming. There's still coffee and stuff around, etc. Last question.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you to Ed as well for being here.
Yeah.
Any last minute thoughts on EAL after watching it?
The question you posed at the end was what the one I was going to do as I suppose as as a consumer, so as a parent. And my children come home with Henry, and but it's that aren't there books? If when you say aren't there, you said there are no books around, but if every teacher found a book, soon there would be lots of books around. That's just an observation.
Okay, lovely. Thank you all for coming. Nice to see you, and hopefully we can keep in touch. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks for it.
Go out, straight out. Do you want to hand it again?
No, I'm fine. I'm fine.
Okay, I'll give you a hand carrying them down if you're all right.
What do you want to do with those boxes? Do you want them to go back to Parkland?
No, I think so. Nothing in the mind. No.
No, then it's fine then. It's just
Lovely.
fine.
Okay, cheers. Where you managed to park down the back? Really?
Yeah.